4, 3. So we are back with another episode of California Liberty Project podcast. Once again, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. My name is Greg. Make sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you get your podcasts. And we do have the relatively new YouTube and Rumble channels where we upload video content whenever we can. YouTube is particularly, let's say, picky and tricky. So if I have any kind of really controversial or really fascinating conversations, I guess, well, they're all fascinating, right? But if we have any conversations that kind of veer into the forbidden territories as far as what we're not allowed to talk about, those are the videos and podcasts which can't show up on YouTube. And of course, YouTube, the audience is still growing there. We've dominantly been on Apple, Google, Spotify. So just listen in and watch wherever you can. But once again, I thank you for being here today. I was off last week. We had some family stuff really important to take care of. We had Snowmageddon here in California where we got a few inches of snow and everyone freaked out. Their hair caught on fire. The world stopped, and every single freeway and highway in southern, central, and northern California, for that matter, I guess, up there too. But every highway was like shut down, and we had to like reroute to get home. It was quite an adventure. But the mountains look beautiful. We got plenty of rain and snow, and we've gotten a lot this winter. Tons this February. It's been cold here, weirdly cold. Now we're into March, of course, but we've gotten tons of rain and snow. For all of you that are listening here in California, probably about 80% of you, we have gotten so much rain and snow that I'm thinking that the stupid drought is over. And I don't want to hear their freakouts anymore about it. I don't want to hear the control. I don't want to hear water rationing. I don't want to hear the shaming anymore because we've gotten so much damn rain and snow. We're good for this year. So let the salmon fend for themselves in the rivers. We need to funnel the rain and snow and the water to families and farmers that need it and pay for the water. But all of that aside, I want to reintroduce and welcome back my good buddy, Blas Vegas Carrasco, to the podcast. Blas, welcome.
Thanks for having me again, Greg. Always a pleasure to be a part of it. And obviously, continue to support the California Liberty Project. So this is going to be a fun one. And I know your pain with the Snowmageddon of California. We get, these ridiculous ice storms in Texas, and it shuts everything down. Everybody freaks out, and you think that the world is ending. But yeah,
right. How do they do it in Minnesota? I mean, California, Texas, we get a rare winter storm, and it's the end of the world. How do they do it up north?
I don't know. Maybe someone from up there can leave a comment or send an email to you or something.
Yeah, I'd appreciate the feedback. How do you get through that? But yeah, anyway, it's great to have you back, man. So this podcast that Blas and I are wanting to do here and that we plan to do in the next few minutes and next little bit is something that kind of stemmed from just a conversation that we were having anyway on the phone, kind of spontaneously. And it was kind of funny. And we thought, this would be something good to cover. This would be a good topic. Okay. So what is the topic that we're talking about today? Among other things, what we'd like to cover is in the past few years, namely in the past 3 years in particular, with the COVID pandemic, the societal breakdown, the freak out, the summer of George, the riots moving into January 6th, everything that we've seen, Russian collusion, that whole fairy tale. With everything that we've been through in the past 3 years, and even 4 and 5 years with some of the Russia collusion hoax, more and more people, I think that I've talked to, and that Blas has talked to, have begun realizing that when you turn on the news, or when you hear from your elite and highly respected leaders in government, what we're hearing is often bullshit. Pardon my French. What you're hearing is often propaganda. The mainstream media is also often just repeating the party line for either the uniparty or the regime in charge And so obvious, it's so obvious that they are lying to your face. And we were kind of chuckling about a little bit of this, the emperor's wearing no clothes, or is the emperor wearing clothes kind of stuff that we've been seeing from the media and that we see coming out of the government, particularly in the wake of the COVID so-called pandemic, which came out of obviously Wuhan, China. I think within the first month or two, it was quite obvious to everyone with common sense and critical thinking skills that that pandemic was coming out of the Wuhan Virological Institute, as Jon Stewart so aptly pointed out in a comedic way. Even liberals, the ones who are awake, are realizing that, yes, this was a lab leak. I don't think we know completely where this came from. Certainly, it's been proven that there has been gain of function research and that there was US government funding and involvement with that gain of function research with Peter Daszak and is it EcoHealth Alliance, all these CIA and United States government funded studies and all this research that they do in places like Ukraine and in places like China, but not here for certain reasons. So anyway, all of that aside, over the past 3 years, Bloss and I were talking, and we thought, there have been a lot of Liberty fellow travelers, and then even some new recruits to being so-called red-pilled. In other words, choosing to or attempting to view the world as it actually is, no matter how weird or no matter how strange it might be, but just choosing to pursue the truth and to see things as they actually are, instead of continuing to imbibe the mainstream media or the government propaganda narrative that we're all being fed. And so we were talking about this, right, Bloss? And then we talked about how maybe we have some acquaintances or some fellow travelers who we think are generally right and pretty good on things related to personal liberty and caring for others and using common sense. But so often with some of these fellow travelers, there seems to be a little bit of an overlap with some conspiracy theories, which have, let's say, maybe less robust sets of evidence for them. Would that be a fair way of kind of characterizing what kind of started this conversation off, Bloss?
Yeah, I think so. You know, we can get to it here in a little bit, but I think because of everything that has happened and more people, coming to question everything that's coming out of, Big Brother's mouth, that I feel that many people feel that, okay, they now have the green light to let everything come out, like all of their theories, and some of them do have some facts and data backing it, and can cause you to question it and be like, okay, well, yeah, let me look at that. Maybe there's some truth to that. While other things and other topics, you're like, oh gosh, it just sounds so absurd, and I'm pretty sure there's not a whole lot of actual data backing it, right? But yet it's part of everything that they're now feel like they've got that green light to come out and say. And of course they do. Right. I'm never going to hinder anybody's ability to do that, of course. But they don't really have a filter. I don't know. It's a kind of a weird world to navigate in, especially if you are originally brought together by this common ground, right? Liberty, we'll say, right?
And questioning maybe the government narrative.
Yeah, questioning the government narrative, not being told how to live your life, not being forced to, take the science juice, as it's called. And then all of a sudden this curveball comes out of nowhere, and you're like, whoa, shit, I don't buy into that. I'm sorry. And what was cool is I had an experience like that recently, but we were still respectful and cool with each other. You know what I mean? At the end of the day. So yes, I would say that is what sparked our little conversation for sure.
Yeah. And so what Bloss and I are kind of talking about is when you say when you refer to the conspiracy theory world, right? we've all started to get into things that we now accept. We've seen a lot of evidence for some of the things I hinted at a few minutes ago, right? And I think these are now mainstream positions because they're supported with such huge bodies of evidence, right? And then so much of what we've seen, lots of people have noted this, but what we were originally called conspiracy theorists for 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I was writing an occasional article here and there, even for Mises and in spots like that. And the things that we were noting 3 years ago, like I say, 2.5 years ago, as I said, those things were borne out and now they're admitted to, they're accepted as fact. And you've got people even like Brian Stelter trying to go back with some of these things and say, we never said it was disinformation, when we were making fun of people for, in regard to either the Russia collusion thing or the Russians targeting American troops or whatever it was. Now they're trying to basically walk back some of these things and say, we were saying it could be, this has the ring of Russian disinformation, what you guys are saying or accusing us of. But it's very subtle sometimes how they do that. There's never an admission that they were wrong about so many things related to COVID-19 or Russia collusion or some of the other things we'll talk about. There's never that admission, right? There's never like a big even, I'm sorry, we came out hard on these mandates and now we've got some of the gold standard studies coming out, for like masks, for example, wearing masks, forcing you to wear masks, forcing you to do that to your children for years. I'm sorry, the studies are now coming out, the meta-analyses as well. And yeah, they really are not an effective public health protocol. Maybe surgical masks, of course, for surgeons to prevent droplets of blood or droplets of saliva or, those bodily fluids, actual droplets, maybe those work, of course. I'm a scientist. I'm interested in getting things right. But we've seen the studies now. And we haven't been apologized to when the studies come out and it turns out, and even the empirical data just from one country, from another country around the world, that high rates of masking, low rates of masking, it's statistically a scatter shot. It's all over the map. There's no trend that can be taken out or pulled out or delineated here. The masks didn't work. We've seen what's happening now with the COVID jabs. Everything that's come out, they've had to admit to the myocardial or the myocarditis risk. They've had to admit to, of course, some of the female reproductive risk and some of those side effects. And one by one, they're admitting to clotting, thrombosis. They're doing this very quietly in certain scientific journals or in press releases. But again, there's never that big, we're sorry, we were wrong. And boy, we shouldn't have vilified these people. We shouldn't have thrown them out of polite society or attempted to do so, right? So we've all noticed this stuff. I mean, Bloss and I have noticed it. We've been talking about it for a handful of years. But then we've been joined by lots of other great people, liberty-minded people. And maybe some of them have been in some of these fights for a long time and some of these debates. And so some of the things that Bloss and I are referring to and are talking about are now people are kind of saying, oh, yeah. So you're kind of against the jab mandates, right? And you're against this or that, or you don't believe the government on X or Y or Z. What about, you get back into like 9/11 was an inside job. You start going there with the thermite. I've never heard thermite so much in my life. And you get into flat earth is kind of making a resurgence, the whole flat earth thing. And it's like, what? Wait, hold on. What? Like, again, I'm a scientist. I'd love to have that conversation, or maybe not. Right.
Sure.
And then the chemtrails people like come out of like another part of the back alley. They come out of the shadows and they're like, yeah, and chemtrails too. And you're like, whoa, okay, time out here. Fluoride in the water. And I'm not like a proponent of public drinking systems. I'm not saying, oh, they're so great, they're so wonderful. But it's like all this stuff starts bombarding you, after everything we've been through and all the lies that we've clearly endured. And we can list these out as well. But then you start saying, okay, at what point do we need to really put on a filter and just remind people that we need a lot of evidence for some of these things? I think it was Carl Sagan that said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. right? What do you think about that, Bloss?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I don't know. I need some pretty convincing evidence, to believe like the flat Earth thing, for example. Okay, which is
Sure.
completely absurd. I mean, I don't know. I could, if you want, Greg. I mean, it's okay. I mean,
Yeah,
don't know.
let's jump into that.
So-
Some of the other ones just to mention before you go into this, because
Sure.
this is entertaining. I've heard recently, and even on I think Tom Wood's podcast, and I don't want to be disrespectful or dismissive to any of these, but do viruses actually exist? So yeah, I want to get to your story here in a second, but I don't know if you heard this one, Bloss. but
No, I
do
haven't.
viruses exist? It's like, okay, we're questioning the lab.
The natural origin of COVID, we think it was a lab.
Work. We've seen the answers on that, right? So we're talking about things related to a virus or a microbe. I don't know if viruses are technically microbes, but they just basically they basically carry genetic information with them. They're not really alive. But at any rate, do viruses exist? It's like, whoa, hold on. That one kind of it snuck in the back door. And I was like, okay, well, now we have like a whole epistemological thing, where we have to step back and say, how do we know what we actually know? Like, does anyone know anything? How do we know that atoms exist? The average like high school or college graduate, you go up to them and say, yeah, how do you know an electron exists? I mean, when you start peeling things away like that, the average person cannot tell you, one, how a car engine works, but two, if a virus or an atom actually exists. And so it gets you thinking. And by the way, I do think viruses exist. I think there's a solid body of evidence that viruses exist. But again, I'm not trying to just be disparaging. I'm not trying to be rude to people of, hey, having a different or a nutty opinion. I've been accused of that many times. After the past 3 years, I'm kind of, and this is what the episode's about, right? But it's like, I'm kind of open to having dialogues, but we still have to have a filter. We have to know if there's an extraordinary claim being made, how do we test that claim? How do we know something is actually true? So it's not only the viruses, it would be things like them questioning the moon landing. Okay. Like I said, 9/11 was an inside job. I was never on that. I was never on that one myself. I didn't think it was plausible. Osama bin Laden had been attacking or targeting the United States for several years before that. There are a lot of things that go into that. I still am not I'm not a 9/11 was an inside job person. Chemtrails,
Don't forget
Earth.
the young Earth.
Young Earth, yeah. For a lot of my, there are a lot of Protestant Christians who are very fine people, who maybe believe quite literally that the Earth could be approximately 6,000 years old, with the young Earth. And again, I'm not trying to make fun of someone's religious views. I'm really not, but it's just when something goes against an entire scientific theory, right? Which theory in science is more than just a hypothesis or like a little idea. Theory means that it is held up to essentially all bodies of evidence, and it is the scientific consensus. It doesn't mean that it's truth. Science is not here to prove truth with a capital T. Science is there to provide us with the most reasonable and the best explanation at the time for natural events or occurrences in the natural world, right?
But Greg, you were taught that. You were taught to say that by the man.
That's true. But I do have some a priori knowledge. I can reason. We can all reason.
Sure.
But anyway, sorry for that long kind of interjection there. But you had a funny anecdote kind of related back to. Well, I'll let you go ahead and tell the story.
First, I have to say that the hosts of the luncheon, right? They're some friends of ours, and they're very sweet people, and
yeah.
They invited my wife and I over for lunch, and on the same page for a lot of stuff, actually, regarding government intervention and the manipulation of I guess, the narrative that they want to deliver to the people, through the corporate press, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Well, we knew them, and we knew one of the other guests there, and we met them through a libertarian group in Fort Worth, and instantly we just jived, and they're just super cool people. Well, there were some other people in the group that are also liberty minded that I had not met yet, and don't get me wrong, they were super nice, they were very respectful, and again, we shared a lot of common ground when it came to, the typical stuff, being anti-government and, anti-war and free market and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But we're having this great conversation, and, just out of nowhere, of course, my wife is sitting next to me. We're all sitting at the table, and some people are having their own conversation. And out of nowhere, someone brings up the flat earth thing. And, my wife and I just got quiet. First of all, we don't buy into that idea. If you do, that's fine. I don't care. So I just wanted to hear what this individual had to say. And, he was pretty sharp on some other stuff. He's a younger guy. But the more I heard all of the flat earth stuff, that we're surrounded by an ice wall and we're in a dome, and, somebody else, another guy that's a friend of mine, he's like, well, he doesn't buy into that whole thing either. And he was like, well, what's outside of the dome? And he's like, well, there's water, and then the stars and the planets, those are angels and demons, and they're having whatever. I don't know. It just got weird, man,
Yeah.
So then right when this individual says, starts bringing up flat earth stuff, which it didn't even relate at the time to any of the stuff we were talking about, there was another person there that we had not met who, I mean, dude, she could have been, I don't know, just your average looking mom, soccer mom. She was dressed really nice. She just looked normal, man, and out of nowhere, she's like, God, there's so many like-minded people. I was like, no. I didn't say this, but I'm like, don't let me into that.
Right.
Don't let me into the flat earth thing. I mean, you have something in
Right.
common with this individual. That part, you don't have anything in common with me, which is cool. And we can have conversation about it, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, that started to unfold. So then another person who was there said, respectively, she was like, look, I don't buy that flat earth stuff at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
And I knew there was a but statement after that. But, we are in I can't even say it with a straight face. We are living in a holographic reality, like this digital realm, and we're like ones and zeros. I can't even tell you, Greg. I'm probably doing a bad job of paraphrasing, and I apologize. And again, I don't want to take anything away from these people because they were genuinely nice.
They're nice people, right? Yeah.
Super nice, and again, very respectful, and I was very, very, very thankful to the hosts. Of course, they weren't even in that conversation. I don't even know. They were kind of doing their own thing. And that was a lot to digest, because I'm like, how did we get here? We're talking about stuff like, okay, we're talking about how ridiculous driver's licenses are, vehicle registrations, and the government coming in and wanting to control every aspect of your living, situation, taxes or whatever. And then boom, holographic reality and flat earth. I don't even know how those came together, to be honest with you, man. And so anyways, long story short, I just told my wife, I said, hey, it's getting late anyways. We had somewhere to be, actually, and it just worked out. That was the timing. So we left. And again, I'm glad we had the opportunity to go and talk with some of our other friends. But I started thinking about it, like, man, how did we get there? So I don't know, man. I don't know if you've ever had that situation happen to you, but that happened to us. So I just wanted to share that with you.
You there?
Hey, Greg. Yeah, I lost you, man.
Yeah, no problem. I'll just start right back up from there.
So what I did was I went ahead. I don't know if it finished my story, and I gave you a clear ending so you could
Perfect.
basically I said, I don't know if by the end of my story I said, look, I don't know if you've ever been in that experience where you're not quite sure how you got from government intervention to flat earth.
Right.
So I just didn't understand how we got there. That's kind of how I ended it. And then I asked you, I don't know if you've ever been in that situation, but
Yep.
anyways, that's what happened to us. And then
Yeah. So I think you probably just couldn't hear me, but I heard all that.
Okay.
So I responded to that, and I'll just pick back up like right now with what I was going to say. I'll just cut out this intervening 2 minutes.
Okay.
All right. Let me just get my thought here, and I'll start right back in like we didn't miss a beat. So as we're all questioning, and we're all skeptical about so much of what the government has told us, or so much of what the mainstream media has told us, like we were talking about over the past 3 years in particular, we have become very skeptical, almost in the philosophical sense of it's really hard to make us believe things. We're almost to the point where we have to have extraordinary proof if we're actually going to believe what's being told to us, either coming from the government or coming from the media or whatever. This is a consequence of being lied to repeatedly in the past few years. So Blas, your story is something that, I have faced similar things before, where it's like, because we're allies and we're fellow travelers and we're skeptical of government and the mainstream media propaganda, that it's almost like a given, or it's almost assumed that we're on board for everything else, which traditionally has had a much, let's say, thinner or not as robust data set or evidence set to prove it up, right? But some things we've seen so much. I mean, we've seen the FBI targeting pro-life groups, which is not really supernatural at all. It's just related to government malfeasance. Again, we've seen the feds lie about gain of function research. That's been proven out. Rand Paul was really good on that. Various hearings going after Anthony Fauci. Fauci and others lied about the effectiveness of the vaccine. They said if you took the vaccine, and Rochelle Walensky as well, from the CDC and whatnot, if you take the vaccine, you're not going to get COVID. And the vaccine was initially 95% effective. Remember that? Then it went down to like 89% or whatever the number is, and it kept bumping down. So they lied, or they just gaslit us about that. Natural immunity, or herd immunity and natural immunity. Those are separate things. Remember, for a while, Fauci was saying, to get to herd immunity, it's some number that kept changing, essentially. Natural immunity wasn't even a thing. You weren't allowed to talk about natural immunity. It was only take the Pfizer juice or take the Moderna juice. That's the only way you could get true immunity, of course. And that was to a spike protein, which your body had produced, and you're getting immunoglobulins. You're getting basically antibodies systemically that, you get the injection in your deltoid, and you get all these antibodies throughout your whole system, not in your nose or your nasal passages and whatnot, where you would normally need antibodies, where you would get the antibodies that would actually help neutralize a respiratory virus, right? We can go down the whole thing with natural immunity versus this synthetic induced immunity from the messenger RNA shots or from the viral vector shots like the Johnson & Johnson. That's a whole other show. But we were lied to about natural herd immunity. How about even just a few weeks ago with the whole big thing we were talking about before we hit record? What happened in East Palestine, Ohio? I don't know what caused that derailment. And again, I've heard some conspiracy theories about what it could be. But what we do know is that the whole situation was exacerbated and made much, much worse, and even more toxic by the feds. I won't say unilateral. I mean, maybe they cooperated with the state officials, but by the feds deciding that they were going to incinerate the vinyl chloride instead of some other way of just scooping it out of the soil and bringing it to like a toxic waste dump. for the sake of saving the town and preventing those people from basically being poisoned and having that poison leach into the water table. Right. The feds made a one-way decision, unilateral decision that they were going to incinerate it. Then we have toxic mushroom clouds, fouling the air and killing birds and whatnot. We've seen all of these things. We've seen tremendous evidence, and we've seen in some cases the feds actually admit what they had done. But then when it gets to like flat Earth, which has been around a long time, maybe it's had a bit of a resurgence. We have to look at, okay, we have some people, maybe some fellow travelers who've been on the flat Earth thing or chemtrails thing for a long time, but we have to look at those bodies of evidence too.
Mm-hmm.
And those bodies of evidence coming from a scientific background, I can tell you they're much thinner, or they have a pseudo-scientific ring to them. So a lot of these are very specious claims. Like, so on flat Earth, right? Loss, you were mentioning the ice wall that's at the edge of the Earth or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like inverting geometry on its head. It's like, so did we flatten out the disk? Because obviously we have a so-called ice wall at the North Pole, and then we have like an ice wall at the South Pole. But of course, in the Arctic up north, that does not have any continent beneath it, right? That's just sea ice. And then down south, of course, that is a continent. It's got granitic, it's intermediate in composition, all kinds of different rocks there in Antarctica. So that is a rocky continent with a huge, thick ice sheet on it. They're different things altogether. But I don't know if some of these details are lost on them. Just around this circular disc, we have an ice wall. Okay, well, can we go beyond the ice wall? Can we set a course to pilot a boat or to float a boat in a straight line? Like that's possible, right? Where does the sun go? What happens with the sun? If the sun just travels around overhead and it goes far away from us and it comes closer overhead, if it does that every day and it disappears, why doesn't the sun change in size every day? You can ask these folks this. Why are the constellations spinning about the North Star, Polaris? Why are they spinning? If what are we, just a disk? I think that's moving upward in space, and that's giving us the illusion of gravity, right? We're accelerating upward.
Why do they look different in the night sky in the northern hemisphere versus the southern hemisphere?
Right.
I'm not a science guy or anything, but I mean that's like pretty logical.
But you are a thinker, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, so you start just poking basic holes, at a pretty basic level, and just start asking basic questions. And at first blush, there is like a science-y sounding answer to all of these, kind of main objections. But then you get like maybe one layer of detail deeper, and the whole thing just kind of starts to unravel. And we're not here to do a full exposition on the flat Earth thing, because I'm sure to be fair to them, there's probably stuff, key pillars maybe of their worldview that maybe we're not doing justice to or whatever. We could have a flat Earth debate on a different episode. This isn't the one. It's more of, we're focusing more on that question of why is it that some of these maybe kookier or less mainstream conspiracy theories, why do they kind of come up and the folks want to glom on to just, I think, a robust skepticism of government lies? That's kind of the fundamental question, right?
Yeah. So kind of sticking with this whole idea of like needing evidence and, all the lies coming out. I know one of the things that you had talked about earlier in the podcast, briefly, you mentioned like the basically the origins, right, of the Schmovid virus, right? The non-existent virus, apparently, that's whatever that is. I hadn't heard the thing about viruses, so that's new to me. So
yeah,
I don't know. I'm having a hard time kind of articulating this, and maybe you can kind of shed your own light on this. But so you have basically all of the horrible, like I would say, the mismanagement of that entire COVID situation, right? the lockdowns, the vaccine mandates, and everything else. Employers, firing people because they didn't want to buy into all this stuff. And you had, Big Brother pushing all of this propaganda. Okay. But then 6 hours ago, I see an article. I don't know if you saw this, Greg. The Senate unanimously passes a bill to declassify intelligence on COVID-19 origins. So then you see something like that, right? So I don't know. There's so many kind of contradicting, like, okay, so what side are you people on? Like, are you going to declassify the intelligence on this? And then will you ever admit to your horrible management of all of this stuff and ruining all these people's lives? Well, of course not. They'll, like you said earlier, they're never going to, the corporate press will never apologize for all of their, disinformation or misinformation or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't think the government would ever come out and apologize to the American people, right? But like you said, the corporate press, man, they're pretty ballsy. That takes a lot of balls to say, oh, well, yeah, we didn't say that. We actually meant this. It's like, no, you bastard, say that. It's like there's videos of you guys saying all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So then I see this particular article, and I haven't read the article because I've been in meetings all morning, but I don't know, man. Like, it's like everything's kind of falling apart, and I'm glad it's falling apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I hope something does come of that.
Yeah,
anyways, what do you think about all that?
Well, so I think you're talking about specifically like with COVID, the origin of COVID, some of that.
Yeah,
classifying that now.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I saw that article, or I don't know if I've read those today, but I did have the question in general and thoughts about it. Like, all of a sudden, isn't it interesting that I think it was the Department of Energy and maybe the FBI within the past 3-4 days or so this week, now it's okay to admit that COVID did, in fact, more than likely come from the Wuhan Virological Institute in China, right? So all of a sudden, isn't it weird? This week, it's okay. The U.S. government, or at least big parts of the U.S. government, are saying, yeah, okay, maybe it was a lab leak in China. Maybe it wasn't like, it was a pangolin and I ate bat soup and all that. They even gave it the weird remember pangolin? They even made it a weirdly, oddly specific animal where people are like, oh, that's weird. That must be true because it's a pangolin. That's weird. Yeah. But and I always think back to Jon Stewart's great bit. It was hilarious on the origin story. But why is it okay all of a sudden to blame China this week of all weeks after 2-3 years? All of a sudden now the U.S. government's saying, oh yeah, okay, it was China. And they're kind of going out on some of the shows and they're saying, well, yeah, we think that could have happened. I think you got to look at what happened last week when there's been movement. China's starting to partner now with Russia. China's coming out and saying maybe we need to push for some peace talks with the whole Ukraine and Russia war. I don't know. I am wondering really if now all of a sudden this is a way to kind of brush China back off the plate, or at least to give them a little bit of a black eye metaphorically, and to say, all right, China, you want to meddle, you want to step in with the Russians, which we were all talking about last week and the week before maybe. Well, so the government, I think, could have been releasing some of this information to kind of brush them back off the plate a little bit. And I'm not saying that is what's happening, but the way we should be thinking is when there's something so coordinated and that's so like 180 degrees to everything we've been hearing, all the dump trucks of propaganda that we've been faced with, when all of a sudden something shifts, just try to look around and see what that correlates with. What else has been happening? Because it isn't just like, oh, the U.S. government decided to become honest overnight. I don't buy it. There's something else that it's tied to. I think in this case, maybe the origin story of COVID. I don't know.
No, yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. It's, and I just saw this thing, but even before this, yeah, I mean, I don't know what you just positioned. I hadn't really thought of that, to be honest with you, but it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I don't believe for a second the U.S. government has a conscience. They're feeling bad about shit, right? I don't believe that at all. That then now all of a sudden they're going to be all high and mighty and take the high road and tell the truth or seek the truth or whatever. Nope.
Yeah.
When has that? So
rarely, very
yeah.
rarely. It seems.
I mean, anyways, so and you could do a whole. I mean, hell, we could really dive into this one topic could be a 2-part podcast thing,
Oh, for sure. Because to be fair, like each of these things, even the ones that I just kind of mentioned, and we don't even have time to get to them all today, but the 9/11 thing, I always poo-pooed that. I was always like, that seems ridiculous. I know the Iraq War and Afghanistan, those were probably very poor decisions, and a lot of people died, and that shouldn't have happened. But in terms of 9/11 itself, I've never seen the body of evidence there for it, and I didn't like it, and I still don't really like it necessarily. But you could look at any of these, whether it's the chemtrails. It's like, okay, I'm willing to hear you out now. I'm at least willing to hear you out because we do have people like Bill Gates who are talking about weather modification. And this has been done in China. This stuff has been done, because of either global warming or whatever. I don't know if they're spraying pesticides up there or weird hormones or whatever. No evidence. I haven't seen any evidence for it. It's an extraordinary claim, right? But these people have said, a lot of the globalists and the Bill Gates types and the WF types, those globalists, they've said that they're into like this weather modification thing. And cloud seeding is the thing for precipitation. That's absolutely something that happens. Whether or not that happens, with all chemtrails versus just naturally occurring contrails. It's not natural, but coming out of the back of a jet and condensation. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not fully bought in there yet. I have to see the extraordinary evidence. That's where I'm coming from with this other stuff.
Yeah, and like you said, there is some evidence that they're trying stuff like solar geoengineering and stuff, and like reflecting solar light and all this. But I mean, I don't know. I don't know enough about it, and I haven't seen enough evidence on one way or to make a sound judgment, right?
Yeah.
On any of this stuff. However, every time these things come up, there are some names that seem to be connected to it all.
Yeah.
And it's the same names over and over. Same people connected to the vaccines and all that other stuff, right?
It is.
Same people connected to the WEF.
Right.
Right? And anything related to climate change, it's the same people.
Correct.
So, yeah. I mean, that's a red flag for me, for sure.
Yeah.
So obviously I'm going to be more open to, okay, you have some hard evidence, you have some data, let me look at it.
Yeah, right. I mean, even like the fluoride in drinking water. It's like, I never gave it a thought. It's like, well, I survived drinking tap water. And, I guess at a certain point we should hold ourselves or like our municipal water agencies or whatever to a higher standard, right? And it's like, okay, yeah, maybe the fluoride in water to prevent cavities, which I don't even, maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. Some people go in regardless and they get tons of cavities. Other people never get a cavity. I think there could be more going on there. But okay, fluoride in water to prevent cavities out of the benevolence of the government, from the feds to the state level to local. Okay, now I'm a lot more skeptical. And, public water systems have really gone bad in previous years. I'm thinking obviously of like Flint, Michigan as being one of the worst examples, right? There's been horrible stuff in water supplies, which is awful, and people bathe in it. A lot of people drink it. And then like you're talking about, kind of remembering the same names. Wasn't it like Paul Ehrlich or one of those kind of catastrophe people, maybe in the 60s or 70s? Forgive me, it might not have been Paul Ehrlich, but it might have been one of his fellow travelers, where a lot of these progressives actually, maybe years back, they were talking about putting even sterilants or sterilizers in the drinking water. Now, I hope, God forbid, they better not have ever done that. That'd be an incredible crime against humanity, right?
Yeah.
But I've heard them talk about these kinds of ideas for population control. It always goes back to
Yeah.
population control. And I'm not even alleging like some Bohemian Grove conspiracy where they're worshiping some stupid idol or owl in the woods, chanting something in robes. I'm not alleging that conspiracy, but these people say it themselves. They say crazy stuff. If it
Hmm.
wasn't Paul Ehrlich, it was someone like him. Like, hey, we might want to consider putting sterilants in the water or sterilizers or something.
Yeah. Sounds like a Bill Gates idea.
It does. It does. Because these people are sickly obsessed with stopping fertility and population control and all this stuff.
Yeah. Well, they have
and-
that God complex, man.
Yeah, where they think they can control everything and make the earth a better place. And we know who the biggest environmental polluter is, certainly in this country, and it's the United States government. You look at what they did. Remember that giant environmental river disaster in Durango, Colorado? I don't know if it was 10 years ago now, but where there was they were trying to control basically there were chemicals that they were using in a mine. It was highly acidic, very noxious. And it was the United States government, one agency or another. I forget which one, but they ended up spilling a huge amount of acidic and toxic water and chemicals into the Animas River, I believe, in Durango, Colorado. And it totally fouled up that river for, I don't know how long, but I saw that it was like yellowish brown water, highly acidic, changed the pH of the water. It was disgusting. And these are the people who are supposedly our moral betters, our scientific betters who understand everything about taking care of the planet, right? They're going to control all of our lives on this premise of you making the earth a better place and taking care of the earth. Well, look what they did in Durango years ago. Look what they did just 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago in East Palestine. They made the situation arguably much, much worse and more dangerous for those people that live in that small town.
Yeah. So this reminds me. So this is all connected, right? And to it here because it's just going to go like way, way too long. I would love to pick your brain even more on this very topic, and get your thoughts on your perspective on the whole climate change thing. Me personally, you're an individual that I would like your perspective on that just because of your background as a geologist, but no, you're right. One of the biggest polluters being our own U.S. government. So it's like you have people just. I'm happy that people are waking up. Not being woke and then that. You know what I mean? They're just waking up to, the real negative player in this whole thing, right? The one causing the biggest problems, causing the most catastrophes, causing the most deaths, not just here, but abroad. You know what I mean?
Right.
Poking the bear constantly wherever they're at. So I'm happy about that. I'm happy about people wanting to, learn more, know what's going on. My thing is that, and I don't know, maybe I'm a pessimist. Maybe I need to read Michael Malice's White Pill book. I don't feel too confident, man, that like the citizens of our country would ever really like put their foot down in the COVID situation. Like, what to what extent will they go the next time this happens? Because what is the next thing? It could be another like whatever
bird flu.
The bird flu. It could be a climate change thing, right?
Yeah.
So at what point, what is it going to take for people to really genuinely fight back, their foot down? I don't think that's going to happen. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I think about the same thing, obviously, because I don't think they, with a capital T, I don't think they're done with us. I think they found out what they could do to control a population with fear and propaganda and giant corporations backing them. And I think they've stumbled onto a very successful model. Who knew that it would work to this extent? Maybe Bernays with writing the book on propaganda many, many decades ago a lot of people have maybe been awake to this, but to this extent in 2020, I think all of us, you and I, all of our buddies, fellow travelers, our families, I think everyone is kind of like, holy shit, what just happened? And this can never happen again. Many of us are saying that. And, now they're talking about like the bird flu, and I get nervous. And that's not a conspiracy theory thing. When they start talking about modeling or wargaming out what we would do for the next one, the WF types, the Bill Gates types, and we're not trying to turn them into a comic book villain. Honestly, they turn themselves into comic book villains. Klaus Schwab and all those creeps, just creeps who want to control everyone else's reproduction and everyone else's lives. They're talking about the next one, whether it's bird flu or a Marburg type virus. God forbid if these fanatics get their hands on like a hemorrhagic fever, that kind of virus, which hopefully those are not, they're not nearly as contagious. That's what I understand. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a biologist, right? Like Ketanji Brown Jackson, but Ebola, Marburg, those are nasty. Those are like, 50, 60, 70% mortality rates. And those are very scary. And we better hope that those are never released or those don't just appear because, they're working on vaccines for some of those things. Certainly for RSV, for, I believe, bird flu. And that to me is scary. When they're planning it and planning for it, in scare quotes, and when they're talking about it and wargaming it out and you start hearing about it, now, man, I'm nervous because whatever the reason is, they found a way that they can control a compliant population.
Absolutely. And, and that's why I was really happy. I don't know any of his political views or anything, but I was really happy to see what Woody Harrelson had to say on SNL last weekend. I think it was last weekend.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And for anybody who did not see that, okay, and I'm sure a lot of people saw it, not just live, but they got wind of it through some media channel. You need to watch it. I have it here. I'm not going to read it because it's better if you hear him say it. Because basically, man, everybody in that crowd, they were the butt of the joke. Yeah. It got strangely silent when he mentioned that part. And it was awesome. Yeah. Now we just need more of that.
Yes. And
we need more of that.
Isn't Woody Harrelson? He's kind of like your old school pot smoking liberal guy, and I don't agree with him on probably 90% of stuff. But when you hear an old school liberal or a true leftist saying, what about civil liberties, and making fun of corporations who are doing the government's business, when you hear that, maybe when I was younger I would have said, oh, that's just lefty talk. But railing against corporations who are doing the bidding of the government. Well, it's a real thing. We've all seen the disgusting corporatism that's overtaken our country and the world. Mm-hmm. And it's so refreshing to hear left liberals and leftists who are not part of the Uniparty saying, no, civil liberties are important. Medical choice, all the pro-choice people, it doesn't just apply toward abortion. More importantly, it should apply to your own body and making your own medical choices. So that was refreshing.
Yeah, so that was awesome. So anybody who hasn't seen it, go watch that. I highly recommend this little montage at the beginning of SNL.
Yeah, right, definitely. And I'd say even talking about Michael Malice, I think we mentioned it earlier, but I think he has a quote, something to the effect of, on these types of things, these kinds of discussions, take a few red pills, but don't overdose on the whole bottle, guys. So don't just guzzle down every red pill you can find because it's a red pill. Search for the truth, but make sure that we have, strong evidence lines to support that. And remember, extraordinary claims do require extraordinary proof. So if we're going to run around, or if someone's going to say that there was no moon landing, it's like, well, okay, but how do you prove it was filmed in a TV studio or whatever the claim is, right?
Right.
Anyway,
I love that.
That
quote. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah. And I'm happy to stand side by side with anyone who wants to fight for human flourishing, respect and dignity for each and every human being, and liberty. Even if they have different views now about economics. I'm in some signal groups with I think some new people who are on the left, on the far left, and it's like you can form these coalitions to stand up against nuclear war. Imagine that. Some of us can have different opinions about marginal tax rates, but we don't want a nuclear war. We don't want a draft for our sons and daughters to be sent to Ukraine. We can do these coalitions, right? These are important issues. Fighting biomedical fascism. We should be able to have coalitions with people so-called on the left. These are important issues. Anyway, did you have anything else, Bloss? Or I think
Man,
this is a good sampling.
No, I don't. It's a good sampling. I think there's some nuggets in here that I would love to see you expand upon for the California Liberty Project, whether it's maybe maybe an expert or whatever, whether how loosely or firmly you want to use the term. But I think I loved it, man. Had a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for coming on once again, man. And we'll be talking to you really soon.
Sweet.
All right. Have a good afternoon, man.